Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the drummer, guitarist and songwriter. It's the one and only Matt James, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Was in several bands, including Gene, who have just recently reformed to play a live date at the end of the year. That's 2025. And also just to say that Matt brought out some solo material very recently. I'll put a link to that in the notes below, but do check it out. It's very good. But this is the interview, so you're going to find out more about Matt, music, the band, and much more. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject that was the early formative years. Matt, it's over to you.
Yeah, I remember my sister having Life on Mars single, and but I remember sort of around that time being into Slade, and The Sweet, and Teenage Rampage, and T-Rex. I remember buying those records myself, or going down with parents and buying them, I remember sort of making a cutout cardboard guitar, and I was trying to make it look like Dave Hill from Slade's guitar, and sort of like coming out and performing in front of the television while Slade were on,
Yes.
And so it's a sort of similar time. We were probably similar ages, I think I remember in 1974. I'd sort of moved on to the Isley Brothers, but I remember getting a present of the Isley Brothers, That Lady, as a 7-inch by my sister, and that was one of my first records as well. But I think when, I'm not quite sure of my 70s years, but I'm not sure which came first.
Well,
but,
I think the 70s, we were very, I say the royal we, but glued to sort of Top of the Pops on a Thursday. And that was quite a random playlist of different bits and pieces, from Telly Savalas to, I don't know, Benny Hill to sort of disco to sort of rock. It was, I mean, there was people like Alice Cooper on there, being quite menacing and peculiar, as well as kind of, David Essex and some of those classics, and Leo Sayer. So there was kind of, pop was quite poppy, wasn't it? It was fun, but it was quite random as well.
Yeah, I think so. I did love those glam rock bands, and I don't sure how deeply I took them. I remember trying the Beatles around that time, but it wasn't until punk rock came along. It wasn't so much the Pistols, but it's the Stranglers and those other bands. That really, I really massively got into music, where I was like, this is what I absolutely love. I took it down much deeper than I did as a kid with the Slade. I was just like a kid enjoying pop music,
Yes, well, I think a lot of it during that period, there was either football and music, or the both of them, or everyone wanted to be Charlie George or George Best, didn't they? Really, at that sort, or Tony Curry. It was football was quite a thing at the time as well.
Yeah. I mean, I was big into football. I was a Wycombe Wanderers fan. I still am. Because that was my hometown, High Wycombe. So I was born in High Wycombe, and that's where I was at that time. But I was also into Arsenal, and because Wycombe were a non-league team.
Yes. What position did you play, by the way?
Oh, back then, I think I was a left back, actually, which is weird because I'm not left-footed or anything. But I remember playing left back. I wasn't particularly good at football, but I do absolutely love football. I still, I follow Wycombe Wanderers religiously, and Arsenal, but Wycombe first. And it gives me a lot of pleasure. Of like anyone, it's a sort of valve release at the weekend, isn't it? Like football.
Yes, I was very obsessed with football during that period, and the '74 World Cup was that World Cup which was my first, and was being obsessed with Johan Cruyff, and the Dutch football team was just amazing.
Yeah, Neeskins, and who else was in
Johnny
that?
Rep.
Yeah.
They was and they all look such cool dudes. I mean, they didn't look like Ralph. They didn't look like Fanny Lee. or Ralph Coates. You know, you had these glamorous people with long beady necklaces wandering around, pointing and looking beautiful, and
Yeah, they
yeah,
did
so.
look cool.
And you know, and the great Johann Cruyff, but there was something gorgeous about them, and I think that's why orange then became my favourite colour. I know it's such an interesting interview, this, isn't it? But then you know, then we had the '78 World Cup, and then after that, I sort of the '80s, I just got bored of football. It's weird, actually. It just
I
didn't.
did a bit. I did a bit. I sort of like, I haven't done football my whole life. I did it my early part of my life. And then sort of, yeah, I think my teen sort of music took over really. And, you know, I decided that I wanted to be in a band more than anything, you know.
Yes. And did
And
you have parents who encouraged you at that stage to put, you know, follow your creative dream at this point?
well, my mum, they were both special need teachers, my parents, but my mum was an opera singer as well. So, you know, I must say, and my sister was like a brilliant musician, you know, who won scholarships to Trinity College. You know, she was like an amazing pianist, and they
Blimey.
always, yeah, they all thought she was the main musician, and she was. You know, she was very, very talented. They didn't really see me as a musician, but my mum was an opera singer. I remember one of my earliest memories is sort of watching a sound check of one of her opera productions and being hidden in the curtain folds at the side of the stage and just sort of peeking out, this little boy sort of peeking out and seeing my mum sort of projecting on the stage, and it's such a powerful memory for me, that, you
My
know, I
God,
think.
it's amazing. Just as sort of, so they were sort of bohemian liberals then, if they had opera come special needs teachers.
I think so. You know, I think, to be honest, they probably voted Conservative, but
Yes.
but you know, I think they all did. You know, back then, I sort of, you know, we weren't. I don't know that they were sort of aspirational. I think they'd come from a working class family who'd been, you know, butlers and drivers and things, but they were aspirational to sort of be, sort of, I don't know, posher than they were. I remember my mum putting on a posh voice every time she answered the phone. It's just aspiration. So they probably voted Tory, I think, and but you know, they weren't sort of, you know, you know, they worked hard doing their teaching, you know, and.
Yes. And during the 60s then, before pre-children, were they kind of part of any beat movement? No, I suppose opera, not really. But you know, were they kind of quite hip to, you know, other? I mean, yeah, I mean, because I come from a working class family, so I mean, it was really let's start working at the age of 14, and you know, it was pretty hard, horrendously hard work at that stage in life if you're in that sort of social, you know, cultural sort of place in life. You know, there's not that many opportunities. But your parents sound like they would have been a bit
Well,
more
my,
switched on.
Well, my dad was from a very poor family. Like, well, this sounds sort of patronising to say, but they didn't have much money. They were from sort of Ashton under Lyne and Rochdale, Hayward in Manchester, and but he was bright enough to get himself to Manchester Grammar, and you know, so he had a sort of, he was the only one in his family that sort of made it there, and he became a teacher from that, you know, and my mum also sort of went on teacher training. And the moment they became teachers, it sort of changed their life trajectory, I think, you know. So they sort of like entered the middle class, I suppose.
Yes, I suppose was it Abigail's party? They had those kind of those moments of wealth that on you know a landline phone was a massive thing, wasn't it? And we used to sort of spend a lot of time going to the phone box with coins, phoning for bits and pieces. You know, like getting an appointment to see the doctor, you had to go down to the phone box and wait. You know, it's very strange.
I Yeah, I remember phone boxes a lot, you know, in my life. But later on, sort of smoking and things like that, and doing, you know, to sort of find places you can, yeah. Like, there was always fags in phone boxes, wasn't there? I
Yes, there
remember
was fags and just damp corners and smell.
yeah.
Yeah, it was just, and the yellow pages and the sort of the phone directory, which was quite interesting. People listening
Yeah.
to this of a certain age have no idea what we're talking about. So when you got to 16, then you'd got the Isley Brothers. Had you bought any other singles at this stage or records?
By the time I was sort of 16, yeah. I mean, what year? I mean, yeah, I would have been in. well into punk by then, you know. So yeah, I would have been into the Stranglers and all those. I mean, I yeah, my friends. I had some friends who were into sort of like ELO and bands like that, you know. But once punk sort of hit for me, that was it. You know, I wouldn't listen to anything else. My Beatles records and Sweet Record, all that sort of stuff I may have had, you know, Isley Brothers included, would have gone out the window, and
Right.
everything sort of just became about punk rock really. And
Yes.
it wasn't until my sort of 20s, you know, like sort of after, because I started to sort of rediscover the Beatles, and then I, you know, found the Who for the first time, and you know, bands like the Faces, and you know, Small Faces, and I became less of a musical snob, I suppose. You know, like punk made me such a snob. It was like had to be the, you know, one of the bands, you know, of the era.
Yes.
Main Strangers, Clash, you know, and
The
but yeah,
Lurkers.
sorry.
The Lurkers. There was a band called the Lurkers, weren't
I
there?
certainly know, yeah, the Lurker. What was their single?
There was something, wasn't there? I just remember they had one of those sort of John Peel single type things, which was, you know, a classic of its time. And yeah, it was quite.
Yeah.
It was kind of because I had a brother who was 7 years older than me, and he was into prog. So when you mentioned ELO, you know, I remember sneaking into his room and listening to that, and then yes, Genesis, Wishbone Ash, and all those classics, you know, and was mesmerised. He also had Sergeant Pepper and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which again I thought were just, you know, I really, you know, I was probably about 10, 13 at that stage, and just being really excited by accessing it while he was out of the house and thinking, this is really fantastic, you know. But there was also those programs on TV. We'd seen there was the Beatles films and there was the Monkees, weren't there, and the Banana
Yeah.
Splits that used to have, you know, those kind of musical moments, as well as the Flashing Blade and
Oh
White
wow! Yes, yes. It's, you really
and
are taking me back. Yeah, Flashing
White
Blade,
Horses and
Campion the Wonder Horse,
yeah, and a big dog called I don't know. There was a big dog, wasn't there, with a barrel?
Digby,
Uh,
Digby, the biggest
yeah.
dog in the world,
I
wasn't
don't,
it?
there was one about there was a lot of those children's TV programs, wasn't there, in the 70s? It was badly dubbed, and there was one of those dogs which had a barrel round its. You know, I'll have to Google this. God, that made no sense to
Well, that
anybody.
was
But
Digby. I'm
was
sure
it?
that. I think so.
There was often a lot of they obviously commissioned these children's programs quite cheaply and had them badly dubbed, and we'd watch
Yeah.
a dog in the snow. I just remember it was a children.
Oh no, that's Sebastian.
Yes, Sebastian, that was it.
Yeah.
God, this is like being at a pub quiz. Yes, that was that was it. And it was Sebastian, you know, yeah, because no one knew anyone called Sebastian if you came from the working class. So it was kind of like, wow, this is amazing. And yeah,
Yeah.
so yes, all those programs. So then when you got to 16, did you stay on for A levels at this stage and continue
Um,
your
Yes,
educational?
yes, I did. You know, by then I was actually sent to boarding school. By then I
God, I
got
thought you were going to say Borstal. Oh, Jesus, whatever.
no, the other the other direction. I'd sort of like, it was a bit of a tearaway in Wickham, you know, and you know, and it sort of got to the point where I probably, you know, would have really gone down the wrong path. You know, I started smoking at the age of 7. You know, that was and it was, you know, I remember being at football matches, you know, at Wickham, and there would be guys like cupping their fags behind the goal, and you know, and I'd be like, "Oh, mate, give us a drag, your fag," you know, and
Right.
you know, and so I was smoking, but not a lot, you know, but we were definitely buying cigarettes, and we used to buy like sort of 10 number 6 and 3 boxes of matches to sort of play around a bit, and you know, but I was sort of going down the wrong path, and I was sent to boarding school in Bedford, which changed my life completely. I mean, it wasn't, we didn't have much money, but my mum, as well as teaching, she called bingo numbers in the evening to send me there. It was like we were right on the edge of budget, and borrowed money from other members of the family, and you know, it wasn't sort of it wasn't easy, you know. I mean, so it was right on the edge of their financial capability.
Yes. Well,
But
it's interesting because a lot of parents would, I know when we had like Christmas or a holiday, dad would get another job in the evenings or weekends to save that money. And my mum did as well. Did some, horrible jobs of, I don't know, turkey plucking or sprout picking in the countryside. It was like, oh my God, I feel so guilty later on in life.
yeah, I mean, and so I was sent to public school basically in Bedford, and
Right. So what happened when you turned up there? Did you pass your O levels or GCSEs at that
yes, yeah, I
point?
did those there, and then I went on to do A levels, and I stayed there, and then right up till they did actually. I was a bit of a tearaway when I was at Bedford as well. I carried on with the smoking and various other sort of stuff you shouldn't do,
Yes.
and and they. But I got involved in acting and things. They knew I was a bit disruptive, but they quite liked me as well. So they did ask me to leave in the end, but I was allowed to do my exams. So it wasn't really like being expelled. It was like sort of being like, oh, we need you out the door as soon as possible, but thanks for being here.
Yes. What were your subjects that you studied or took?
Oh, so I did ancient history was the one I was best at. So I did an ancient history A level, and I think I'm right in saying that I got the top mark in the school for that. But then I did economics and politics, which is one subject. So that was the other one, and then biology, which was a very very bad choice, and I didn't actually even turn up for the exams. I think I turned up for a couple of them, and I got an O in biology because I didn't actually turn up for the A level. That was the sort of kid I was. I didn't fancy doing it. I was just not going to go, and
Yes.
which is looking back was pretty selfish of me considering they'd sort of really pushed the boat out for me. But
I know those bingo nights just
yeah,
It's
but
like a cheap version of Flashdance, isn't it? That film where, like, I don't know, she was a welder by day and a dancer by night, whereas your mum was a teacher and then a bingo
yeah.
caller. It was a budget version. Yes, my God, it's such interesting social history. No one would believe it, would they? But it's kind of it. So when you did your A levels, did you then think, right, is it UCAS? You then start to think of going to university at this stage?
By then, I was definitely just wanting to be in London to get into music.
So had you
Um,
started playing any musical instruments at this stage?
yeah, I mean, I'd been in a few bands from the age of like 15. I remember being in a school assembly, and I'd not ever played the drums before, and there was a drum kit set up, and there was a school band doing it. And I said at the end after this, so they were playing like "Smoke on the Water" or something like that, and um, and I just said, "Well, can I have a go?" And they went, "Well, you can't play." I went, "Yeah, but let me have a go." And I literally sat on the drum kit, and somebody struck up some sort of blues thing, and I just started playing along. And they said, "You said you couldn't play," and I'd literally never done it before. I just thought I could. I'd sort of maybe drummed on my knees, and then sort of realised that I could actually do it quite well, along with records. And I'd never sat on a drum kit before, so I just sort of. They said, "Well, you can play. Where did you?" I said, "Look, I've never sat on a drum kit before," and that was it really. And by the afternoon, I was in a band. So join our band, and we were doing Cure cover versions and Clash, and we were called the Passion Killers. And
Blimey.
we did a few gigs around Bedford, and although I think that was actually on school premises, but we had loads of Bedford punks coming to see, like, who weren't anything to do with the school, and like coming in and sort of demanding to see us. We did something or other. So yeah, I'd been in bands from the age of sort of 15, really, and
Crikey. That is
yeah, so
just amazing that you sort of picked it up that quickly and easily.
yeah. I mean, I think drums is one of those things you can learn it, but you can only be sort of really sort of good at it if you've got a certain amount of natural. There's the natural rhythm thing is really important. You can sort of teach yourself it, but you can never really sort of shine it. It's one of those things that I can just sort of do. I'm able to do it. And I didn't know at that point. So. I was always
Yeah.
I was also at school with the guy called Rich Thayer, who's in the band Red Snapper, and I don't know whether you know them, but they're a fantastic band. And he was like a drummer as well, and he was absolutely brilliant, and still is, of course. I mean, they're touring at the moment, and so I remember sort of watching Rich and thinking, wow, he's just so cool. And I always think of Rich as like a far superior drummer to me, although in actual fact we're very different. Rich is sort of more into funk and jazz. He can really do all those beats, and I'm a bit more Charlie Watts, I suppose.
Yes, God, that's yeah, amazing. So then, so you then went to college or university
Yeah,
after that?
to Polytechnic,
Of course,
Thames
yes.
Poly, which is it basically, I did get into Goldsmiths College in New Cross, but my school forgot to. Even though I did get in because I'd done well in ancient history, I was going to do history and sociology there, but I didn't. The school forgot to send my confirmation that I'd actually got these results, and then literally a week before I was supposed to be, I said, "Well, I haven't heard from you. Like, where's my accommodation?" Sort of thing. They said, "Oh, you didn't, your school didn't send your thing, so we haven't got a place for you." So I found out a week before term that I didn't have a place at Goldsmiths, and so the only place I could get at short notice was at Thames Poly in Woolwich, and I couldn't do history either. I had to do just sociology, but by then it was. I really, the sociology, it didn't really matter what it was. I just wanted to come to London and meet people and be in a band. Really,
Yes.
I was obsessed with it by then.
Yeah. And what years was that? Your degree years?
83, as I went to Thames Poly, and then I left in 86.
Blimey, that was a
Um,
glorious time for music as well. Because also and a great time for higher education because you get a grant, don't you? And
we
va-
did, yeah.
various other bits. You basically didn't get any debt, And I remember sort of in the 70s and possibly the 80s, people would get housing benefits, and it was kind of quite easy, really, wasn't it? So
Yeah, I think I remember my mum having to she wasn't so rich, so she didn't have to pay too much. I got a grant of most of it. She had to pay something like £300 a year or something like that, or 400. I don't know. It wasn't a lot, and but yeah, the grant was amazing, and I didn't. It was one of those things at college. I didn't massively go to a lot of lectures. I was doing whatever I want. I was being quite hedonistic, if I'm true. I wasn't just
yes.
trying to be in a band. I was taking quite a few drugs and and sort of like messing around. And but I would, we only had 8 hours a week on the course, if I remember rightly. So, which is not very many for like a full course. But I only went to 4 of those. So I did about 4 hours a week of college, and just hung around Woolwich and went up to clubs in central London, like the Batcave and places
So
like
had you
that.
gone from sort of the punk period to goth? Had you made that crossover?
Yeah, that was definitely like Woolwich that did that. I remember like bands like the Specimen and Alien Sex Fiend
Oh,
coming to, and I remember being really impressed by them. But later I sort of like the it was the very early part of goth, and when it was actually quite cool, it was a club thing rather than what it became later on. And when I saw it getting commercialized a bit, I moved on into C86 era, like the Wolfhounds and Mighty Mighty, all the bands
yes,
on
those
the
classic
on
periods. Yes, because 83, I mean, it is kind of I mean, there was kind of a lot of other musical scenes happening, like you mentioned, goth. There was New Paisley, there was Psychobilly, anarchic punk. But then indie pop comes along, doesn't it, in '83 with the Smiths, which I kind of
Yeah.
think there's that 5 years between the beginning and the end of the Smiths, where that suddenly, you had, the June Brides, you mentioned Mighty Mighty, Age of Chance.
McCarthy.
Yes, God, and the Comsat Angels, and then the Chameleons. I mean, it is just suddenly the floodgates sort of open, doesn't it? And suddenly indie pop happens in a way that is just a kind of glorious period, really. The Bolshoi, which is a great
Oh,
band.
yeah.
So yeah, so at that point, then, did you just go to gigs a lot at that point?
Yeah, we did. At Thames Poly, we had a bar called the Cellar Bar, and there were gigs on every week. And I would just go to anything, Um, which was really good. I was able to see bands like The Alarm, and stuff, and sort of not massively like their music, but I loved the spirit of The Alarm. They're a very spirited live band, The Alarm, and then we'd have like Conflict would be there, and it would be full of punks, and then the Wedding Present. I remember the Wedding Present guitarist had a Leeds United scarf as his guitar strap. And now I saw the Wedding Present many times in the Cellar Bar. And yeah, the Wolfhounds. I really, really liked the Wolfhounds because they felt like similar age to me. They felt like kids. And McCarthy did as well. They felt like, well, they're just like us. They're just us. They make that I can do it, and it's just, and they were like sort of they were sort of just, well, alternative pop stars, I suppose. They were starting to
Yes.
make their way and touring. They left their town and went up to Manchester and around the country touring. And it just like it struck me as the most amazing thing you could ever do, really.
Well, I think it was quite handy because you had the 3 weekly music papers that had huge circulations. You had John Peel, Janice Long, Kid Jensen, so you got to play on that, and then you had this kind of indie circuit. You had this alternative indie circuit, didn't you, around the whole country? Every town had one, so you could play at sort of Bristol, Leeds, Glasgow, Norwich, Ipswich, you could get a little tour together quite easily and at least attract 150 to 300 sort of indie fans to come and flail around. It was
Yeah, I was in a band called the Go Hole at that point. Which is the name of a club from the beat novel Jack Kerouac's On the Road. Um, um, but we didn't really tour. We did do a single, but we didn't tour. We did some gigs, and we were pretty good, actually, to be honest. I think the Go Hole. But we didn't massively get it. I don't think we really got to tour. Maybe a few gigs. I can't massively remember, to be honest. But that was my sort of the band, the first band I was in then, and then it sort of moved. A few years later, it moved into indie dance. But that was when did indie dance hit? That was a few years after that,
was that
probably.
sort of 80, like 87 indie dance? Was that
Yeah, I think so.
because there was
Yeah,
there was the kind of the moment where I think ecstasy started to appear, and the Smiths had broke up, and suddenly we weren't that excited by the Mighty Lemon Drops anymore, or the Primitives. Though we had, but there was that kind of moment where people like Primal Scream and the Soup Dragons and Stone Roses and
yeah.
Happy Mondays started to develop a little bit of a different vibe, didn't they, as the '80s progressed?
Yeah, yeah, and we sort of the guys I was in the band with, we sort of got commercial a bit, and we said, well, we're definitely gonna be this, and we dressed up, in similar clothes, like we'd gone down to Greenwich Market and sort of bought these sort of designer T-shirts that looked all similar, and we all wore them, and we got signed, this is a band called Spin, and we were playing
Spin,
in.
yes.
Yeah, and we were playing in a where was it? It was in Fulham, the King's Head in Fulham, and we were supporting a band. I think it was the Honey Smugglers or something like that. But anyway, Stephen Street was in the pub to see the other band, and he liked us more, and he came up to us, and that was our break. Really, we signed to
Oh,
Stephen Street's Foundation label, and I've been friends with Stephen Street ever since then.
well,
Like
yes.
I've worked with him. He's worked. Well, I've just known him for 30 years, I suppose. But ever since that day when he walked into the pub in Fulham, I just sort of he sort of changed my life really, and it was the first time we'd had like someone who was actually going to put a record out there, who was actually quite well known. He'd obviously done work with the Smiths, and we revered him for that, and he was just like God walking in, and
Yeah, well, he did,
it
I
happens to
think.
be.
And he did, yeah, because he was a bit of a go-to producer, wasn't he? There was a band called Bradford, I think he was.
Yeah, we were on the same label as Bradford.
Right, and that's the Foundation label. So
It's it.
so you put out an album In Motion, hadn't you, at that stage,
That's
91?
it. Yeah, yeah. That's exactly it. And but Spin came to a very sad end. I don't know whether you know this story of Spin. I mean, most people wouldn't. I know, but we had an accident on the motorway. We were touring. That was a band that were going around. I mean, we were doing gigs all over the country, and we were playing in Dudley JB's. And we had not the greatest van in the world, and I have to say that it was my mum's money that bought the van.
Right.
It wasn't the greatest van, but it broke down on the motorway on the way back from Dudley JB's. Funnily enough, very close to High Wycombe, which is where I'm from. But we were sort of, a couple of guys that were with us were trying to fix it, had their head in the bonnet, and a lorry driver, sadly, tragically fell asleep at the wheel and veered off the motorway and hit us. And
Oh, Jesus.
yeah, people were very, very badly injured. Like the sound guy broke his back, and our tour manager sort of it was broke every bone in his body, poor guy. Another one was sort of brain damaged by it, and I came away with injuries, but not thankfully injuries. And but that sort of that version is a very tragic event, that still haunts me to this day, to be honest. But
Yeah.
that was the end of Spin in that form. But we actually, members couldn't continue, so we had to we actually continued Spin because we had a record deal, and we had an album that to come out, and but then we had to sort of find other people to work with, and that's
God, that's a
yeah. But
horrendous moment, wasn't it? God, that's just everyone's nightmare of getting hit. Hit.
yeah,
And
it's terrible what happened, and it's just I feel incredibly lucky that I wasn't more injured than I was.
yeah, crikey. Yes, because that period, it was quite interesting at that point, because obviously, you mentioned indie dance with that sort of ecstasy scene, but there was also this kind of the shoegazing and those bands from North London like the Faith Healers and Silverfish and My Bloody Valentine. And I suppose there was a scene, wasn't there, the Camden scene with people like Carter, the Unstoppable Sex Machine was starting to develop as well. And then in America, we had Bleach, and
Yeah,
Seattle scene, and 4AD was bringing out the Pixies and Throwing Muses. So how was that sort of all
I
sort of
remember. I remember when, weirdly, actually, the night of the crash we had, which would have been 91, was it? I've heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit" for the first time at the club after we'd played, and I remember like the same audience that had kind of liked us, a little bit, or a fair bit, but went absolutely crazy for this record. So when was "Smells Like Teen Spirit" released?
yeah,
Um,
it's a good point. But
yeah,
yes,
but that so. Basically, I remember sort of thinking, indie dance is over. It's definitely over, and then it was kind of for us later on, like in a very tragic way. But yeah,
yes.
and then grunge came along big time, and everybody, we didn't, quite. I never really went down a grunge path, but I did love Ride and Chapter House and the sort of shoegazy bands, and we did sort of morph into that kind of sound a bit. My Bloody Valentine, we loved them, and we sort of we sort of moved on into a sound which was much more like sort of, it wasn't total shoegaze, but we were experimenting. That's why we didn't really make it, because we were just copying other people and doing our own versions of it. It
Yes.
wasn't till Gene came along later, with the personnel, that we sort of worked out our own sound. And it's after all these years of trying it, through, I was actually 29 by the time I got a record deal proper that actually paid a wage. The others were much younger, like Martin from Gene was, I think he was 21, Steve was 21, but myself, but myself and Kev from G were older, like sort of late 20s.
So with Spin, Martin had been in Spin, hadn't he?
He did, yeah. Like we.
How did you find the band at that stage of Spin? How did you form? Was it from university, or was it just people on the scene answering to the back pages of the Melody Maker?
Well, the Spin Mark 1 had been in the Crash, and that was with Steve. Steve Mason from Gene was in Spin, and his brother was the bass player. And sadly, he was injured, so he couldn't really carry on afterwards. So we needed a bass player. We found Kev Miles, who was a friend of a flatmate, basically, who'd been our tour manager, who was also injured in the Crash. So we had Kev, and then with Martin, we were needed a singer to actually be in Spin, and Stephen Street took us to the Underworld Club. And I remember, I think Blur were there, actually. I think he'd been working with Blur. And we were sort of hanging around with them. I think they were there. Damon was, I think. And like sort of Steve spotted Martin and just thought, who's that guy? He looks quite cool. And it was one of those things where he just sort of sauntered up to him and went, who are you, sort of thing. And Martin sort of like said who he was, and he produced a card that he got from his wallet, which said, Martin Muster, soothsayer to the rich and famous. And then he had another one. He brought another one out, which just said, consultant psycho killer, no job too small. And so he had these sort of bizarre cards that he would print out and sort of like deliver one. So we were like, who's this idiot? But we thought he looked cool. We thought he looked right. And we said, do you want to like come and audition for our band? And he said, well, I'm already in one. He was in a band called Drop, I think.
Right.
And he said, yeah, I'll come along. And so we auditioned him. And we'd been auditioning other singers to carry on Spin. And but when some quite bad choices, like Cliff Richard types, like would turn up. And we were getting a bit depressed about the auditions. But the moment Martin came in, it was just we knew we had it. We had this vibe, and we were jumping around the room literally within the first sort of 30 seconds of striking up a song. He didn't just sort of sing nervously. He sort of took the mic off and started sort of walking around the room. So I think we were like, oh wow, that's cool, So he took control of the situation. That's what I would say.
Right. So yes, I know it's interesting, isn't it? With some front people, they have that little moment. You think, yes, that was you were meant to be, really. So
yeah, I mean,
did you do a John Peel session then with Spin?
Yes, I think we did. Yeah, but I think that was the earlier version of Spin.
Right.
That was the sort of indie dance one when we had a different singer, and he wasn't injured in the Crash, but he left because it freaked him out too much. And there's a chap called Lee Clark, and a good songwriter actually. But probably he wasn't charismatic. I don't mean to be unfair,
No.
but or nasty. Do you know what I mean? I don't. He was a great writer, and I don't think he quite had the charisma for like frontman. But Martin was the opposite. You know, he had real obvious charisma. It's just a strange one, isn't it? You know.
It is, yes, I know. It can't, well, it probably can be taught, but it's somehow, there's something quite genuine about those classic front men and women, which is quite different, isn't it? So, yeah. So then so Spin, when did Spin say that's, to quote Jim Morrison, the end? And what happened between Spin and Gene then?
I think we basically Stephen Street did some recording with us. We had and then we did another set of recording. I think he didn't think it was quite good enough. I think that the record label thing sort of stopped and everything, and we decided that it wasn't massively working, and we just sort of went away and rehearsed and changed and just basically found our own sound, and at that point I was, really sort of like very, very. I'd got to sort of mid-20s and hadn't sort of managed it to achieve my dreams. So I was also like taking too many like things that I shouldn't. Just like you know just sort of
So with
smoking.
with an indie band, then, so there's the drinking, the bit of smoking, and then sort of do like Hawkwind, there's speed, there's acid, there's all sorts. What do indie bands indulge in? This is the great sort of experience. What's the drug of choice for an indie band, from indie dance to
Well,
shoegazing?
I couldn't afford cocaine. There's no way that I would be able to
Yes,
afford that. But
oh,
we would buy Speed, Sulfite, and that was the one, because you could buy that for a tenner, and basically it's very, very bad for you, amphetamine sulfite. But you would be sort of rub it on your gums, and it would take quite a lot of speed, and I would smoke a lot of dope. I remember sort of like I wanted to be stoned the whole time, so I would actually roll a joint, like a one skin joint, before I went to sleep. So the first thing I could do in the morning was like sort of feel around the bed, sort of like, where did I put that? And so within 30 seconds of waking up, I'd be sort of stoned, and but it was that needed to change, and thankfully. The accident and whatever, it shook me up, and I started sort of not doing all that and basically getting up early. And I remember driving. Steve Mason was living in Kingston. I used to drive down there from South London, from Brockley, where I was living, and it took an hour and a bit every day. And I'd be down there for 9:30 in the morning. We'd work from there till sort of 6, and then have a pint, and then I'd drive back. And we did that every day, every day we possibly could, and then so. And Martin was living in Watford at that point, so he didn't really come to the writing sessions then. But we would send him the demos we'd done, a bit like I suppose Morris used to send Mar demos, didn't he?
yes.
And we would make the demos up on our cassettes, and then we had a little 8-track thing, and we would send them up to him to sort of like write over, and then he would join us once in a while and come and sing what he'd done, and
So were you all claiming unemployment benefit at this stage? Because that was one of the things that I found that helped the indie pop scene of the
yeah,
80s and 90s. It was just unemployment benefit. And
I did do lots of crap jobs. I did I delivered lawnmowers for a living. It was a complete skive doing that. I had a 4-hour run, and sort of I would just sort of pretend it took me longer than it did, and just sit and listen to music on like Epsom Downs, and like halfway along the route. And so I did that. I worked on R-Press Records as well, but that was a bit earlier. But mostly this time I was signing on. Yeah.
yes, it was very handy.
It was very handy. Yeah.
Yeah. So was this kind of period between Spin and Gene, or was this still Spin where you were working in this fashion?
It was sort of like Spin had come to. We decided that Spin probably, we needed to do something else. So it was the sort of in between phase. But we decided we're not going to name ourselves or be anything until we've got some really good songs. And that it wasn't. I think Kev from Gene was a big part of it because he was really into the Faces, and Steve was really into Big Star, and those two bands. We were listening to those two bands a lot, and we kind of like modelled our sound a bit on those two bands, and not everyone was sort of. We got quite an interesting hybrid of them, and we sort of like we got something that sounded quite original, and we honed it, and then Martin put his lyrics over it, and I mean, people said the Gene were a bit like the Smiths, but we were. I think the Smiths are a great band, but I was never a fan of them. I didn't follow them even in the 80s, Like Martin very much did, but yeah. So when we wrote the song for the Dead, we just thought, this doesn't sound like anybody else, And it's the first time I just thought, this is quite original, and it really does sound very good and not like anyone. We're not trying to be anyone. We felt like we were leading for the first time, and
Right.
when it got played to the two journalists, Keith Cameron and Roy Wilkinson, they agreed and thought that's different, and they helped us massively by putting their own savings into making the first Gene single.
Blimey, because there was those monthly magazines. There was Vox and there was Select as well, and you must have been darlings of the Select crowd because they were quite early champions of Britpop, weren't they?
Yeah, I remember Select. Well, that was a bit later, but yeah, I remember Gina Morris from Select. She's still a friend, actually. She sort of came down and interviewed us, but our manager was very good with sort of. He had been an enemy journalist himself at one point, Jerry Smith, and he knew Lamac, and he knew all those guys. He knew Keith Cameron, and he sort of introduced our demo to them, and it was journalists going, we quite like to break a band, and
Right, because you mentioned Chapter House, and there was another band, I think quite local to here, the Bardos, who were, they were always bubbling under. I think they were supporting people like Suede at that time, and were almost going to make it. I think they were darling to the Melody Maker for a couple of issues, and then got savaged in a review, and I think it killed the band off. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? The savage journalist that can kill a band's hopes and dreams.
Oh yeah, I mean, in those days, some of the journalists were pretty bad. Some of them were very funny, and highly intelligent people, but some wouldn't even turn up to the gig, And I mean, Taylor Parks was sacked for that, wasn't he? For reviewing a gig, and he wasn't actually there because and he got shot.
Yeah, so it does all seem rather mean now, actually, doesn't it? When you look back and think, why did people have to be so nasty? But yes, it was a bit of a. There was just it was also Q magazine that had also really taken off during the 90s. That was the kind of the go-to publication, wasn't it? So then with Gene, you did your first single, didn't you? Which was on. So what was the label for that first one? Sleep Well Tonight.
No, it was For the Dead was the first single.
Right.
And that was 1994, and we made 1994 copies of it, and it happened pretty quickly after that. Actually, like we'd been sort of knocking a lot. I'd never had anything like that before with my other bands, even though I had been signed. I'd never had press attention, when people and once. Once the press sort of like started checking us out, and it spread like wildfire. And after we had that single on the Costermonger Records, which was something that Roy Wilkinson came up with, the Journo, and a great name, once we had that, everybody was started to sort of give a single of the week, and then within like probably a month, we had like 100 record companies trying to sign us, and every gig was absolutely round. I think we did 6 shows with Gene, and you know, having done years of like gigs with no people there, all of a sudden it's the first time that the Eye of Sauron had just sort of like come towards it, and it was just like every gig was absolutely rammed, and it was music biz people like trying to. I remember we were taken out by so many record company executives. It's sort of we had to do different lunches every day with people, and like, not just record companies, like publishing companies as well. So like, I didn't quite realise the difference between the two.
Yes, I know.
So
That's the great mystery of life, isn't it? Really, these, who owns the music, the publisher, and the record label. I mean, that's
yeah.
just it's a kind of a weird world, actually. It's I don't know. Did you ever learn how it all worked?
I do now, no, because I put my own music out, and but I didn't massively care, and I was just like, am I going to be able to do this? Like for the foreseeable, and as long as I didn't really care about the money side of it, but I obviously wanted to not be on the dole anymore. I'd been so skint on the dole for years that, like, sort of when we had a record deal for the first, I was just like, I just felt like really rich all of a sudden, and it was just like it was more money than I'd ever had. I mean, I think we signed publishing. I think we got 235 grand as our first advance, but that was only part of it. And then we got an advance from Polydor Records as well, which is 150 or something like that. So there was this money there.
Blimey. And that was the 90s, which would be worth a fortune. So did you have sort of management at this stage? Had someone said, look, guys, we're doing well?
We had Jerry Smith, who had been with us in the Spin days. He was Stephen Street's sort of partner in Foundation Records, but he'd been an NME journalist. I think he still was on the days of Foundation. But he sort of like stopped doing that and became our manager. And his brother happened to be a music lawyer as well, and that was pretty good because he was able to sort of deal with all these, the attention of all these companies and deal with it professionally. So it seemed like we were a professional outfit, like we had a lawyer and sort of stuff. And so Jerry was managing us, and I have to say, he did a very good job of like stoking up the interest, and signing. It wasn't the highest bidder actually. I think Sony came in with a higher offer for us, but we signed to Polydor in there because we liked Paul Adam, who was the A&R guy, and he signed Shed 7 and Cast around the same time, and I still know Paul. He's a great guy.
God, that's amazing, isn't it? So then that was 94. You brought out quite a few singles, and then 95, the album came out.
Yeah, Olympian. Yeah, and which is 30 years. It's the anniversary was that's what this show that we're doing now is about.
And when did you record this? Where was it all sort of? Where did the magic happen?
We recorded it in a studio in Battersea, which was known as Townhouse 3, which had actually been Pete Townshend's old studio.
Right.
And the Who had recorded. There's some great footage of the Who in that studio. I think they're recording "Who Are You," and it's that they're all like messing around in the vocal booth, and Mooney like just being an idiot.
Clapping, yes. This kind of weird, yes, that is a nice little bit, wasn't it?
It's a lovely, like Mooney's is such a character, and so that studio. It used to be owned by Pete Townsend, but then I think he sold it to the Townhouse, who had 2 other studios. It was Townhouse 3, and at that time. We were everything was ahead of us, it was just like the most exciting time of my life, I think, because everything ahead just looked good. We had tours were like set up. We were like really good festival slots, and we were learning and sort of absolutely taking it serious, taking our job seriously, and sort of doing it to the best of our ability. But
Yes. Did you play Glastonbury that year as well?
I don't
95.
think so. We did Reading in '94 when
Right.
and I think by '95 we were headlining the tent. So within a year we'd gone from um, mid on the bill in the tent, in the sort of second tent at Reading, and then on '95 we headlined it.
Right.
So,
Blimey.
yeah.
So, and the album came out. Now, because being pretentious in younger days is always important. And foreign films, I remember the 80s having lots of exciting foreign films like Betty Blue and Diva and, all those. And then was all the classics we had to go back. And the Seventh Seal, the Ingmar
Yeah.
Bergman Seventh Seal. So was that a film that you'd all seen and got very deep and stoned to?
No, I mean that.
I say, oh yes, I say that because that's the album cover, isn't it?
It is, but it was in the the artwork in those days. Like Martin would just go off and come back with a picture, and then he sifted through. He used to go off the libraries and go through loads and loads of stuff. I don't think he was a massive fan of that film. Well, he might have been. I don't. It's like it's certainly not. It wasn't a band sort of thing that we were all into, if I confess. But Martin he chose the early single covers, and he did an absolutely brilliant job of the imagery. It was when we all got involved including the record label, that our art started to decline a bit. By their second album, it's just like they spent an absolute ton of money on Rankin doing like sort of a special session and making like a theatre in a swimming pool. So why would you do that? Why would you spend like a ton of money doing it? And then and our third album, we didn't, we were all sort of putting our oar in, but it was much better when Martin went off, found a cool arty photograph that
Yes.
suited it, and and so that was what happened. Yeah, so that's the link up with the Seventh Seal.
There's nothing like design by committee to kill any form of genius, isn't there? So
Yeah, there's a lot riding on it, and sort of people, yeah, they sort of think, well, you've got a say, and like, sometimes it's better that you don't have a say because you're not
yes.
particularly like the sort of like, like we dropped we dropped the capital G in the Gene logo on that second album, so we had like a small G, which is one of the most stupid like Spinal Tap sort of things, but just like it's like sort of it's like the mini Stonehenge sort of coming down. It's like, why would you take the capital G away? Just too many people getting involved. Oh, we must change it for the sake of it. Yeah, and that's design.
Rebrand, because there was a single I got actually, which I had forgot about, but I won't be able to conjure it here, but it was a release that you had, I Can't Help Myself, on Sub Pop Records. Can you remember that? And what was the story? Because I think I got sent it or given it by somebody.
Helter Skelter. Helter Shelter, yeah. Helter Skelter. It was a homeless charity, a charity record, but run by Sub Pop, and yeah, Lisa Powlon was the woman behind it, and she had we did a gig and with various bands on it, and she put sort of these special records together that were on Sub Pop, so it was just like a charity thing, really. But but it was brilliant. The set of records. Who was there? I think Supergrass were on it. I think Smash, Elastica, Us Lot. There were some decent bands actually on it. I can't remember all of them, but there was a set of. But you could get like this box set of the 7 inches, and
right, because there was another collection. Oh, it was a Blast first one called The Devil's Jukebox, which I remember being, it was a beautiful thing to have. It had all those bands like the Buttholes and Sonic Youth and Big Black and I don't know, various Steve Albini stuff. So that was all very exciting. So then, once that had happened, what was your? Yeah, then you did a John Peel session. Was that another good experience for the band at that stage?
Yeah, I mean, I'd loved John Peel since I was at school. Basically, I remember listening covertly to John Peel with. I would have the sort of transistor radio under my pillow. I'm not supposed to be listening to it, and I remember I would just be able to have the volume up enough that no one else could, hear it, but I'd be able to just hear what. And I remember listening to sort of Nick Lowe. I love the sound of breaking glass and all the things he used to play. So John Peel was a hero,
Oh
uh,
God, yes,
and
yes.
we ended up, I think, being the most. We did the most live set, not the most sort of recorded session in the studio. I think the Fall or something like that. I think we did the more live sessions for John Peel than any other band, because he didn't massively, and he used to say this on the radio. He wasn't really a big fan of our records, but he thought we were a brilliant live band, and just always supported us in that way. And which is a strange one with John. Well, we did do sessions with him and Lamo, the evening session. We did lots for them.
Yes. I do. I sort of what I liked about Peel, and especially when he had his producer John Waters, I think sometimes they realised that they might not go home and listen to them, but it was good. The record needed to be out there and heard. It was which I kind of get that kind of actually this is an interesting record and someone's going to like it somewhere in the world, even if it's not my favourite thing. It's something quite unique about it. So I quite like that
Yeah.
idea or ethos they had about the show. So I'm sure there's a lot that they played that they really liked. I think John Waters especially was a bit more of a concept person, saying, "Look, we should play this because this is quite an interesting thing, even if I'm not going to enjoy it." But it's what the show was about for the BBC. So it was
No, we
good. I
did.
mean,
We did a thing where I would phone. You were able to phone John Peel. This is from yes, I remember this. This now it's all coming back to me. I used to go to. I mean, we were talking about phone boxes earlier as well. I remember going down. Well, we had a single, and this is the early days. I think it was a band called the Go Hole I was in. And in going down with my mates and I would have to phone the BBC and in a phone box. And I'd say, well, can I speak to John Peel, please? And he'd be actually on the air. And they'd say, well, who is it? I said, oh, it's Matt from the Go Hole. And the you would get like they say, hang on, wait there, and then suddenly John Peel you'd be able to phone the BBC and get John Peel on the phone. And he said, yes, got it here. Yeah, no, it's actually good. I'm going to play that later. Yeah, and then sorry, gotta go, and he would, and that was amazing that you'd be able to just. We can't have been the only band who did that.
no, and probably did you used to sort of vote for yourself in the Festive 50?
Oh, I'm sure we did. I'm sure we did. But yeah,
The Festive 50 was essential at those times in life.
yeah.
We just loved it, actually. So, yes, that was all good. So when you came to your second album, yes, this had Fight and Fit on, which was one of those ones. You started to appear on those Shine compilations, didn't you? Which we
Yeah,
loved. That
but
was, and that was where Britpop started to, it was just a glorious zeitgeist moment, wasn't it?
yeah, I mean, it was. We had a lot of pressure on us to write hits. Then, we'd been allowed with Olympian to make the record we wanted to make. They didn't. The Polydor basically allowed us to release. They signed us, allowed us to release it on Costermonger Records, even though they paid quite a lot of promotion for it and things. But it looked as though, and it was an indie label, but it was our label. But they were sort of funding it. But then when it became to our second album, they were like, well, we're going to make you into a worldwide band, a big band now. And we were like, they tried a bit hard, to be honest. I mean, their intentions were good, obviously, to sort of, but I don't think we were really ready for it. We went from, I quite sort of, almost lo-fi record, which just had a lot of charm, and it really was the way we sounded. To working with a big name producer, Chris Hughes, who'd done all Tears for Fears, and he'd been in Adam in the Ants, an amazing producer. I sort of wish we'd worked with him a bit later on, but I remember like Lucian Grange, who's now like the head of Universal, like worldwide, and coming in, clapping his hands and going, "Play me the hits, boys," And he actually did have a cigar, and as at the same time, and it was just like, oh my God, what have we done? And we were not allowed to be on Costermonger anymore. We were on Polydor. That was part of the deal. You get your Costermonger album, and then we're coming in and we're changing it, and all of a sudden the videos were costing 90 grand to do. And I think we spent an absolute fortune on Drawn to the Deep. And we were in a very big studio in Chiswick called Metropolis for months, and and it was like £900 a day or grand a day type thing, so it was costing a lot of money. And, but it was this idea that the record company would make an expensive record, and they would then spend even more money, and you're going to force you into the stratosphere, and you become like a huge band. And
Yes.
that was their idea, but it was the wrong idea, really. I think, in hindsight, it sort of, we went along with it. It was obviously a very exciting thing, and we were sent to America quite a lot. We were building fan bases there quite, very well, in all over the world. But we weren't quite ready for that, because the moment a record company spent that much money on you, you've got to sell. You've got to sell 1 million records, minimum, and a lot more, preferably. And if you don't,
Yeah,
the
it's kind of
writing's on the wall.
interesting, the death of a lot of the indie bands who were on an indie label and the second album was on a major. Even if they thought it was going to be a funky little major like Virgin, it was like, oh dear, we're not enjoying this. Like there was a band called the Red Guitars, and I think they were sort of halfway through the second album thinking, actually, I don't really want to do this anymore. And it was like, no, I don't. And that was the end of that. And there was another band I remember who were brilliant, and they kind of got put on the major, and it was like, okay, guys, you've gone from indie pop. Do you want to support, take that? And it's like, oh my God, not really. It's like, well, you could be big, It's like, actually, we just want to make music. So it's a very tricky one, isn't it?
It is a tricky one, and I've managed bands myself. I managed a band called Moa, who I signed to Graham Coxon's Transcopic label, and but they were never going to be actually, maybe I certainly wanted them to be, and they certainly had the talent, but I don't think. I don't think we should have been projected that far, that fast.
Did you feel, though, because this was, your second album, this is 97, this was New Labour, Team Tony. It felt so exciting. I mean, there was a lot of kind of, there must have been a lot of champagne and cocaine whizzing around as well on the record label front, wasn't there? Because there was a lot of money. I mean, suddenly Top of the Pops was full of Sleeper, Elastica, Blur, Oasis. It was just the good times, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was definitely getting into coke then, and sort of, I remember being at parties. All of a sudden I'd go to a party, and I remember Elton John. I met Elton John at a party, and he introduced me to David Furnish, and it was just, that's weird. And we talked about Wycombe Wanderers and Watford, being very close to each other, and it was just bizarre. Sort of, I remember Bryan Adams coming up to me, like Polydor had bought me. They sent us to Savile Row. We could have a suit each in Savile Row, and I got a blue velvet suit from Savile Row, and I was at a party, and Bryan Adams came up to me and went, "Hey man, nice suit," like, and those sort of things started happening to me. And I remember Kev being in the urinal with Michael Hutchinson. Michael sort of like saying, "Who are you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm Kev Miles in a band called Gene." He said, "Well, I'm Michael Hutchinson, I'm in a band called In Excess." Just men at the urinal,
Yes.
And those are sort of crazy things that, but that's it. It was, we all, I mean, we were sort of flown out to like Laguna Beach in California to be at a sort of polygram conference, and Janet Jackson was there, and Martin was playing piano at the bar with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, those sort of things. And even the rehearsal rooms, we'd be rehearsing with the latest boy band. I remember having a pool competition with Five, what I mean? And then Massive Attack came in, and then we all had a sort of a pool tournament with 3 different bands. It was just like stuff that just, pop star stuff, I
Oh my God,
suppose.
this was Spinal Tap meets, I don't
It
know.
is, yeah. It's very Spinal Tap.
This is.
But
I can't remember the guy. Was it the guy they met at that sort of promotional things? Was it Harvey? Oh God, I can't remember his name.
Artie Fluffkin.
Yes, Artie Fluffkin. Yeah, kick my ass. Yes, it was all very good. Yes, when you did, with that second album, Fight and Fit, which was a very snap. Did you feel, was that a song that you enjoyed, or was it like you'd been pressured into? Was that something that you thought, well, we don't really love it, but yeah, that's your single?
I'd say it's kind of the way I feel about Fighting Fit, although I love playing it live. Well, I haven't played it live for 20 years, but I'm going to play it live again. But it's got it's a very spirited song, and it's fast, and everyone loves it. I think it's a really good song. I just I don't know. It doesn't move me like other Gene work. The best thing about Fighting Fit, from my point of view, is the fact that it's got a very long drum solo in it, like sort of just before the verse starts. It goes on for about 8 seconds, and you never get a drum solo in a pop song that long, and it's probably the most dexterous thing I do on the drums. It's very fast, and so I like it for that, and I love playing that role. Or I will love playing that role again.
Yes, absolutely. Then, so I mean, oh yeah, and there was also Murray Lackland Young, wasn't there? The £1 Million Poet at that stage. So there was a lot of money, wasn't there? Did you? Because there was also that kind of vogue for sort of getting the orchestral little, I don't know, musicians in, weren't there? There was My Life Story. Then suddenly, every band suddenly had that little orchestral touch. Did you have any pressure to have a few violins or cellos in the sound?
We had a bit of violin on Olympian, and I mean Martin sort of is able to score thing. He's sort of he's very good with music. So we did actually have some strings on Olympian, and then we went even further with that for the next album, and a lot of. Yeah, we did. We went quite far. I mean, I love the what strings have added to Gene records. I mean, even when we played at the Albert Hall in '97, we had an orchestra with us. And so we were, not a full one, but we had the strings up in like 2 sets of like strings and brass we had. In the Albert Hall, just sort of tie it in with this great institution that it is, and we were sort of doing all that, and I think strings have coloured a lot of their records actually, but
yes, it's interesting. So when you came to doing your third album, this was in the famous Rockfield studio with the amazing Hugh Jones.
It is, yes.
God, if only I could ever interview. I just love. Where is he? He's still alive, isn't he, Hugh?
I don't know what happened to Hugh. I don't know. He didn't sort of. I haven't sort of, sought him out anywhere. But I do agree. He's absolutely brilliant producer, and I think of all of us, I think probably Martin got on with him best in terms of his vocal, and we all got on with Hugh. He was a top guy, but I think he was probably the best producer for Martin. I think he got some really good vocals out of him, and we were in Rockfield. We had a great time down there.
How long did you stay there for?
We were there about a month, and then we came back. We didn't have, by then, Polydor had sort of we hadn't sold enough of, even though we'd done some big things and we were selling out everywhere around the world in our gigs. We hadn't sold enough records to them, and they were like, "We're gonna." They were already, resolved to drop us. But they was, oh, we're going to do another album. It was a bit sort of, I suppose we better do another album. But we had our budget pulled massively, and so we had to do. We had a month in Rockfield and then some mixing time in London. And so, as opposed to the second album where we'd had months and months spending sort of Stone Roses type money,
Yes.
that had all gone. So we said, well, you can go down to Rockfield. You got 4 weeks there, and that's what we had. But that was a decent amount of time. We had a lot of songs for it that were quite good, and we had a great time there with you.
Yes, yeah. So with a song like "As Good as It Gets," has that got fond memories for you? Do you enjoy playing that live and listening to it?
Yeah, I think good as it gets. Yeah, I've always enjoyed that one. Like, I don't know whether it's my favourite one. There was a song called the British Disease that I used to really enjoy playing from that third album, and I really enjoy, and we're sort of, because we're going to be playing again, we're sort of starting to have those arguments about which songs are going to get in the set. We've got too many songs, and I remember I was trying to make the point to the guys in the rehearsal the other day, like how good that song is, but others were like preferred one of the other ones, and so we're going to have that battle. But I think Good as It Gets is a great fight. That we were trying to do a bit of a Springsteen vibe, with that one, and it is. I do enjoy. I enjoy playing all Gene songs,
Yes,
or did, but yeah, you obviously have your favourites, I think.
was that album the third one? Was that was the New Labour kind of Tony Blair? Did that heavily influence the kind of vibe of that album?
Yeah, I think by then we were sort of realised, that we'd been conned a bit by it, and we'd fallen out of love with New Labour. I mean, certainly, like the three of us in Gene are quite lefty, and we're very, very excited. It was brilliant when Blair came in. I agree.
I mean, yes, we still reminisce about that night and those few days or weeks.
Yeah, I remember sort of being in. I think we went to Glenda Jackson's party after being accepted.
Who didn't?
Yeah, and
We didn't.
and that was the most exciting time ever. We was it's just like it really did feel. But a moment Iraq happened. It was this kind of I'm not.
Yes,
it was this kind of. It's arm a dictator and then bomb his people. It's sort of. I fell out of love with New Labour, and so Martin always writes the lyrics in Gene, and he was very much. I mean, his sister was involved with the Labour Party, so but he'd definitely fallen out with them by then. They turned into something else, and the Iraq War was the worst of it, really, wasn't it?
Yes, it's yes, it was not great. So so then did you tour that album much at that point without sort of a backing?
Yeah, we did. We did. We didn't sort of play a gig the size of the Albert Hall again, but we had some decent sized venues. We're always we came down a bit to sort of like, I think Albert Hall holds about just under 5,000 or 5,000 something, and then we were back to sort of 2,000-3,000 sort of venues, in London, but. Yeah, we did tour it, and I remember we had some quite good support bands, and we had Muse supporting us on that. Like Muse, we had a sort of a thing where local bands would be able to submit demo tapes to us, and we had a tour support. I think the Supernaturals, no, I can't remember. No, it wasn't them. That was the Albert Hall. But we had a thing where local bands could submit demos, and it was usually me that had to go through them. And one of them was Muse, and I picked Muse to support us. I think in Exeter first, and then we had them on, I think, half of a tour on that third album tour. So we were still doing, and
because you would have come to, because I just looked, you came to the Norwich waterfront, and I believe Muse were supporting you.
Yeah, that sounds right. So we had some really good support bands, and we were still touring successfully, and we were still able to go abroad and do it, and go to Japan and do it. The great thing, going to Japan is always a wonderful thing. I think we went there 5 or 6 times, and we were still able to do that then because we were kind of, the Polydor had sort of like given up on us, but we were still popular, so we could sort of survive without a label, really.
Yes.
And we sort of knew that, but then we did go as far as like asking Polydor to drop us. You're going to drop us, so could you drop us soon, as rather than just hanging on to us for like a year, and then sort of where it'll be over by then, because you're not going to put another record. You can just let us go. And they were like, yeah, all right, So they did let us go, and then we were on our own without a label.
Yes, I wonder. I'll have to look at my little gig ticket, won't I? Whether it was the '99 gig that I came to see the band. It's so curious, actually. So then, as we entered the new millennium, had you started recording the fourth album, wasn't it, at this stage, Libertine? Was that recorded? What was the state of the band at this point? The fourth album, it's quite a major moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we were on our own, although, we were still doing quite well, still selling out gigs, and but we had to record the album with our own money, basically. But our publishing, we still had a publishing deal, because I think we'd recouped that, and so they were sort of, that had gone quite well. So we weren't without some sort of support of a music biz company. So I think the publishing company Chrysalis gave us an extra advance, and we used it to self-record Libertine up at the chapel in South Thoresby in Lincolnshire with Hugh Jones again. And he cut us a very good deal, and we went up there for probably a month or something. And we worked very, very hard on the songs for Libertine, as we had with, I think, for Revelations we had 27 songs for the album, and with Libertine we'd also had a lot. I don't think it was quite 27, but probably about 20.
Yes.
And we'd worked very hard, sort of, because it was like it was a make or break moment type thing, and and sadly, Libertine, is, with the band members, it feels we absolutely love the record. It's not our most successful record. Once we got it recorded, we didn't have any money to promote it. Like Polydor had unlimited funds to do posters, and that it would be, and we still managed to get on the radio and things, but all the other sort of marketing support had disappeared, and we hadn't the money to do it. We'd spent all of it trying to record it, and nothing to. And then we were with a distributor who kind of ripped us off, unfortunately. And who didn't sort of like pay us what they should have, and so that's what our manager fell out with them, and it's sort of. Then we fell out with the manager over that, and it sort of, it was, the writing was starting to be on the wall a bit, It felt, we moved over to a different manager, and we were starting to have to get a job, like in the week,
Right, my God, that's
yeah. So and then so we did sort of things at the weekend. because we could still go and sell out venues, but it had to be at the weekend because we sort of like, I think Steve had a 9 to 5 job. And I think I went back to being on the dole or something, or I don't know what I was doing. I was surviving,
Yeah.
and but it's I think the Martin sort of called time on it sort of after that in 2004, and
Mm.
I think I think he felt we didn't fall out, or he just saw it shrinking, and I was very much of the opinion it'll have a blip, but we should maybe stop doing it for a while, but don't split up. But Martin, he wanted to sort of just call it. He wanted to draw a very thick line,
Right.
and I understand that.
Yes, I suppose it might feel emotionally important. With some of the songs on the album, they're quite. I remember it was Elvis Costello, Blood and Chocolate. He did an amazing song called "I Want You." You
Oh
start
yes, I love that.
you start with a number which is quite. It evokes a certain. Does he have a name?
Does he have a name? Yeah,
A 7-minute epic, which is quite an interesting
yeah.
opening. What was the story with that
Oh,
sentiment?
we. Um, Martin was going through a breakup, I think, with his wife at that point. I think that coloured some of that album lyrically.
Right.
Sort of musically, we did love an epic, and I love. I was experimenting with drums more. I love reggae music because
Right, yeah.
I was allowed to sort of play with reggae beats a bit on that album, and sort of like all sorts of shuffles on the hi hat, and um, I think I still love that album to this day. I think a lot of Gene fans um, don't they haven't got to it, which is some of the very big ones have, but it never massively. I still think there's quite a few Gene fans who haven't got one, and we
Right.
might sort of put it on sale at our gig that's coming up. Have you got this one? Are you sure? It's some of our best work,
Yes. So
but
it's full of it's a bit Elvis Costello angsty, isn't it? The other one,
it
is it
is.
over? Do you want another lover? Do you tire of me? Was that also Martin going through his stuff
I
again?
mean, I'd really tough to. That's I alluded to him over the breakup. I think I think that was it's probably not right of me to sort of
Yes.
say too much, because it's his personal life. But I mean, obviously it's a record and it's out there, But yeah, I think it was a difficult time for him, and but yeah, it's got a gloom about it lyrically, but it's Martin never been particularly sort of happy lyricist, but he is absolutely brilliant lyricist. I really do, I try not to blow smoke up his ass, but he is a fantastic, very high quality lyricist. I think, like there's there's few as good as him, I think, from our scene.
Yes.
Um, I don't think he's people sort of kind of compared him to Morrissey, and it's just really unfair. He certainly was into that, but he's up there with Morrissey. I think. I don't think they sing about this. They got a different style. He definitely has his own voice, and I think he's up there on a level with that. And so
Yeah. I mean, I never really. I mean, I was obsessed with the Smiths. I never really thought Gene were like the Smiths. To be honest, I did.
certainly
I
not
don't think
music.
it didn't. It didn't seem. I mean, a 4-piece band, and the same sort of instrumentation most of the time. But it didn't. Something was quite different about the two bands. I didn't feel like, oh yes, this
Yeah.
sounds like the Smiths. I mean, like
No, that
I
was a
didn't.
journalist thing. That
And
was a
it,
quite
yeah,
cultural thing. People like
and
to
also I
regard.
think most bands, what they're being influenced by, obsessed by, comes out in that music, and I couldn't imagine the two sets of bands having that same influence that the Smiths or Gene had at all. I mean, yeah,
No, it was just the faces and originally, and then sort of soul, like Kev from Genie absolutely loves, sort of Marvin Gaye and Northern Soul, and he took us down a lot of avenues. Kev, his influence musically on the band is huge, actually.
Yes.
And, so we didn't we weren't influenced musically by the Smiths, really.
No. So 04 comes along, and that is the end of the band. What then happens? Where does everyone go at this stage?
I sort of originally sort of stayed in the music because I was managing bands. I said I managed a band called Moa, and then we signed them, and I did a bit of session drumming. I had some fun. I played with British Sea Power. I remember like sessioning. I didn't join British Sea Power, but their drummer was injured, and I remember doing a tour with them, like Reading Festival, and we did the Eden Project supporting Ian Brown.
Fantastic.
And I'd had some really good. I remember I played drums with Natalie Imbruglia on a tour, but it was mainly a radio tour because her drummer was ill or something as well. Who called me when the drummers are ill? I didn't make them ill, I promise.
Spinal Tap garden incident, really.
I toured. I did a radio tour of Europe with her. I managed, but I sort of. So it never really worked for me. I never got the same vibe. I realized I would rather do something else than not do, the main thing where I'm co-writing and being the act, if you know what I mean. Sessioning for people just doesn't quite give me the same kick. And then I started to work at what else I could do. And I started looking, what else do I like doing? And I said, I like drinking. And I became a wine merchant. And I started, I had I got into wine a little bit, and I've been a wine merchant since 2008.
Fantastic.
And that still looks after. That's my day job. That's what I've been doing today. I've been making a proposal for a wedding events company, and of my wines, and that's what I do. And I actually, to be honest, I do love being a wine merchant almost as much as music, but music's always first. It's just like a visceral feeling, that it's just something else, isn't it? Music. It's just that you can't put your finger on it. But I do love my job, which is why I kept doing it.
Well, that's yes, but then because I came across your Bandcamp page as well with various bits and pieces. So when did you start putting out singles and records at this point?
I think it was sort of 2020, a few years ago. I needed a sort of a long break from music. I sort of my dreams had been shattered. I sort of bright dreams had bright hopes had raised me, but they'd sort of disappeared.
Yes.
And I was a bit sort of hurt. Steve and I did a band called Palace Fires after June for a while as well, which I love the record that we've made, but it was really unsuccessful in terms of commercial vibe.
Yes.
And so I was kind of a bit hurt and sort of just realised I'd maybe had my fun and needed to do something else now. So I needed a complete change, and I didn't pick up the guitar or massively listen to music, really.
It's tricky. It's tricky without John Peel.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. I didn't have the same love for it. I find it a bit with music. I can't the sort of person I am. I can't sort of listen to it, or I couldn't listen to it without analysing it. I'm a real over-analyzer, so I'm going, why have they gone to that chord in the chorus? Why? Oh, that's a terrible lyric. Just not just letting it wash over you. Just that's just terrible. They'll never make it, that band. They just don't have the. And I'm just what? Well, you just listen, So I needed a proper break from it, and so I sort of I didn't rediscover that until 2019 when I was on a family holiday, and I started to play the guitar with my niece, who's a great singer, and we were sort of just doing cover versions of Tom O'Dell, or whatever was around, the things that she likes, So I'll play what Tom, and so I'd sort of rediscovered how this, and then once the floodgates were open again, I've just been sort of doing it. I thought it was an amazing challenge to actually to sing lead vocal and
Yes.
and write the whole thing, and I can sort of throw my hand in at all the instruments really. But I just thought it was an amazing challenge, and I'm very much on that journey and thoroughly enjoying it. I feel like a bit like a 15-year-old kid in a band, even though I'm a 60-year-old man. When it comes to my music, I'm sort of very much in the learning phase, and it feels quite fresh still,
Yes. Well,
you know.
absolutely. Because I was just listening to your Bandcamp, the stuff you got on the Bandcamp page. Because there's
Yeah,
I have to sort of confess, my favourite song is Snowy Peaks. I think that's just a brilliant song. I love the lyrics and I love the
yeah.
musicality of it. It's a really, so was that kind of one of the early ones that you'd written?
It is, yeah. I wrote a sort of I wrote it on holiday. That holiday I've just been telling you about, actually. It was a vibe, and my wife and I were just sort of lying with a rare moment away from the kids, type thing. They were asleep, but we were sort of lying, and we just sort of had a rediscovery moment, and. It's a love song basically, but we were staring at these sort of like peaks in the background, and yeah, the vista was amazing. It was just a very magical evening, and yeah, I agree with Snow Peaks. It's like it's a pretty decent melody, and I think it was actually probably the first thing. I think the first thing I wrote where I just thought, actually, that's pretty good. That's not a bad melody at all, And
Yes.
I'd sort of, I'd had a few failures. I always think you've got to write about six things that are crap, and then sort of the seventh is quite good. I think it was like that. Yeah. So it was that one that kind of kicked the door open.
Right. No, it's one of those ones I've gone, played quite a few. I thought, well, actually, this is quite, this has got quite a vibe to it. Actually, I love the sort of the lyrics, but also that production because because you got this album Breaking the Fall, which is,
Yeah.
so this has got quite a sort of a group of musicians on it. Kev, you got Steve Street, Mick Talbot as well,
Yeah.
Steve
Yeah.
Mason. So it's almost members of Gene and various other guest musicians.
Yeah, I've been very lucky. I've got pals who'll come in and but they don't spend time working up the songs with me. They just sort of come in the studio and sort of like Stephen Street is very good at putting them to work. And there's a lovely spontaneity about it. We don't have the budget for rehearsal rooms for a few weeks, and sort of it's just. I sort of play most of the instruments on my records, and then we bring people who can do stuff better than me to make it sound better, basically, to sort of give it some pizzazz, I suppose. And so, yeah, I'm able to sort of call on friends. And Mick Talbot had been like keyboard player for Gene, and we had various keyboard players.
Yes, that's when I saw Mick Talbot. Was at the Waterfront, wasn't it? Yes, it all
Yeah.
makes. Did he always tour with you, or was it just that
No, I
time?
mean, he didn't in the early years. He didn't do the Albert Hall sort of second album type, but he joined us around the 1998, 99, I think. Kev from G is a massive fan of Style Council and Jam, and all Weller sort of associated things. And Mick is absolutely. He's an absolute gent and just an amazing player, And it was amazing to have him in. He would just pick up, yeah, right. He's a lovely guy who just come along and just sort of throw his oar into it, and he absolutely improved everything that he does, and he can do it spontaneously and
Yes.
pick up a vibe, And so yeah, I've had him and Perry, who's the guitarist in Pendulum, who's he's an amazing guitarist. He's a session guitarist, or had been, with lots and lots of things. So, and Steve and Kev from Gene, and yeah, sort of my friend Ken as well. A lot of people turned up. I've still got a long list of mates who I intend to tap for future recordings. They don't know it yet, but they're sort of in various bands. I can't tell you who it is, although it's sort of like before I've even asked them. But,
Yes,
I've got plans.
You have got, yeah. What is it's because on there you didn't just do it as a digital download. You printed over 500 vinyl records of this.
Yeah, I had about 600 or so, and because the way they just came out of the press, I wanted some for promo, and I put 555 on sale. And I didn't have a distributor or anything like that. I literally, I emailed the record shops like Rough Trade and so myself. I was like, it's me. Once of Gene, I've got this album, and they went, have a few copies, and I mean, some of them like I think Rough Trade took like 40 or something like that, and I hadn't had them back, so they must have sold okay. I've probably got 100 left here that were kind of for promo, but I feel sort of good about that, the way that went. I didn't make any money on that record, but I didn't lose any either. I sort of, everyone did me a favour, a deal. I paid everybody, but not a lot. Do you know what I mean? They did sort of, they were just being friendly, including Streety himself. I just feel incredibly lucky to have pals like that. Okay, yeah, I'll tell that, mate. Yeah.
Oh, that's so lovely, actually, isn't it?
It is. Yeah,
it's just so nice.
It's humbling.
Yeah, it's very humbling. Yes, it is. Makes you feel like, yes, I'll pay that forward one day. So, which is always, it's a nice vibe, isn't it, to have? So that was So that was a hell of a project you did over the beginning of the decade. So that's good.
Yeah,
and then sort of how does the next phase or the next chapter then develop for the band and yourself?
Well, what you mean, my own music, or you mean the Gene thing?
The Gene reunion.
I mean, what's happened is, I was quite happy. I recorded 4 songs with Streety in December, and then literally after we mixed them, like I think the next day, I had a call, or someone I'd done an interview with. It just said, "There's a guy trying to get hold of you, and he manages some bands." And I was sort of thinking I should use some management for my own thing, And I said, "You're a manager, you're great. I'll listen to that." And there's a chap called Kevin Fitzgerald on the phone who manages. Well, he manages Sleeper. He manages Alabama 3. Recently, the Fratellis as well, and Huey Morgan. A few people.
Yes.
And he said, he was a lovely chap, and he just said that we'd like to talk to you about getting Gene back together. I said, well, you're talking to the wrong guy here, because, I 100% gave up on Gene. Martin did a retirement show, and I 100% gave up on Gene ever happening, about 5 years ago. So it's pointless talking to me. So he said, well, actually, I'm working with Alan McGee, and myself and Alan have been in touch with Martin, and he's actually quite interested. I said, no. He said, no. And he said, well, yes. And I talked to the other two, Gene, and the next minute, Alan calls us to a hotel in Soho, where it's weird. We hadn't seen Martin for years, and he sort of like cut us off a bit, really. But probably because he didn't want us to. As I said, we never fell out. But he probably didn't want us to convince him to reform.
Yes.
I'm not reforming for them, but I can't let Matt sort of get into my head and sort of like convince me it's a good idea. But I don't know why, really. But anyway, the three, myself, Steve, and Kev, were in the pub before we went to meet Alan and Martin, and we bumped into Gary Crowley in there. It was like, what are you guys having a beer for? And I said, well, we just occasionally meet up in London. He said, what, the 3 of you? Like, where's Martin? I said, well, we don't know, So we had to lie to Crowley that we was sort of like what we were doing. And then we went to meet Martin in a hotel and so, and it was, we sat down with Kevin and Alan. Alan manages Ocean Colour Scene and
Yes.
the bands, and they just sort of they just let us talk. Really, they just sort of it was, and within with literally almost immediately, the banter sort of kicked back in, and it was kind of. I felt that it was going to go okay. You can tell immediately when someone's attitude or face is wrong or something, but everyone's face was friendly. And there's like all bands, we have a great band banter, sort of lots of stuff that we've always joked about over the years, and that kicked back in, and then and they also had this sort of thing. You can actually, we think you could do a pretty big show, and the money came up, and it was the money isn't it for me, it's like. It may be more for some people than others. Everyone has their own reasons, but for me, it's like my kids are 7 and 11, and they'd never seen me do this. So we stopped doing it. We stopped doing it in 2004. So that's my driver. And it just sort of we talked around venues, and Brixton Academy came up, and then Hammersmith Apollo came up, and all of us were like, "Oh my God, that would be amazing if we could do that." We never played the Apollo back in the day, but all of us said it's way too big. And the last show we played was like the Astoria, which is 2,000, holds 2,000. That was the final Gene gig. I think we could have sold a bit more than that. It was very sold out. But
Yes.
so why do you think we can come back and do one that's 5.3 thousand? And Alan was just sort of like. He's got that. I called him another interview. I said he's like the Alex Ferguson of indie rock. You don't want to like after the hairdryer trip, you don't want to throw your boots at him. He's got a sort of persuasive, calm way about him. He just said, "Look, I'll make it right. I'll make it right." And we sort of like kind of trusted him, and we sort of allowed it to go on, and then they went away to get offers from promoters who were very, very interested, and they thought we could absolutely do it. So it's sort of their call because they're putting up the money for it,
Yes.
to do Hammersmith Apollo. You have to I can't say how much, it's unsavory to say how much, but you have to put a big deposit down to do that, and you have to be pretty sure that you're going to not lose that. And so the guys, the management guys, the promoters, Crosstown Concerts, they made the call and said, we think you can do it. And it's sort of like I thought it was too big, but I just think, well, it's not my era in a way. I won't look too good if it doesn't do very well. But it's kind of their era. It's sort of that's just it's nothing to do with me. It's they're going to make the call, and we just trusted them really. And it's turned out, it was on. It looks like it's going to sell out. I mean, it is sold out apart from a few hundred they've held back for a general sale.
Blimey, it's kind of done and dusted.
It went on sale yesterday. Was it a Wednesday? Yeah, it was yesterday morning. I'm not sure when you're going to put this out, but
yes, it was end of March.
And then I was seeing the numbers come in, and after 6 minutes, they'd sold 3,000 tickets in 6 minutes. So I was thinking, oh, this is good. It slowed down a bit later in the day, but literally it's been 24 hours, and it's like the pre-sales sold out. And tomorrow morning, which they're putting the last few hundred tickets on.
My God. That is just amazing, isn't it?
It is. It's off the scale exciting. And I was just saying to the guys, we have to because we haven't sort of played for so long. Obviously we will rehearse a lot, but I'll have to. The enormity of it will just be like I have to sort of do the first 20 minutes on autopilot a little bit. Like learn the song so well, because if you you could get carried away by that, the emotion of the whole thing and the enormity of it, and just sort of, you know, it'll be amazing, and just hope nothing goes wrong, But it's. I mean, when we played the Albert Hall, something did go wrong. We had a sound problem, which made us leave the stage for about it was the biggest night of our lives, and we had to leave the stage for about 10 minutes while they sorted out a feedback issue. And so I hope nothing like that happens. But just the sort of the response from people.
Yes, well, it's quite emotional. Does it also feel, without getting too huggy, does it feel like a bit of a healing process for your dynamicness of the band and these characters that have shaped such a big chapter in your life?
Yeah, it does. It does. It does feel healing. I always thought it was a good idea to do Gene again, but I'd certainly given up on it, and so it's very weird in that respect, But yeah, it's sort of something that is needed to happen, and it seems to have happened in the right way. And we've had 2 rehearsals. One, we insisted on having 1 rehearsal before we announced the show because we needed to check, like we could. There's still, like if it was how it was going to go. But at that rehearsal, this is good management for you. That they arranged that we would leave the rehearsal, which is about 10 minutes away from the Hammersmith Apollo, and get in a cab and be there. And they'd arranged for the Gene right. I don't know if you've seen the photo that's out with this picture. It's us stood outside there, and they put Gene 4th of October up for 15 minutes. If you can get there at 1:30, the guys have come in on a Sunday and they put it up, and it's going to be there for 15 minutes, and you can just go have your photo taken out. So that's from our first rehearsal. We left the rehearsal, went up there and did that, and then we sort of like, we said, can we come in? Can we go in and have a look, And they're like, oh, go on then, So the next minute we're like up on the stage looking up, with an empty venue, taking photos from the stage. And it was an amazing day, really. And that certainly focused us for the rest of the rehearsal, where we returned to the room. And we've had one since then, and which was absolutely brilliant, that we loved, just realizing how much our songs mean to us, and how proud of them we are, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's lovely because quite recently, the Man from Del Monte, which was an late 80s band from Manchester, managed by John Ronson for a short time. I mean, they just reformed and thought, actually, no one's going to be interested. But if someone wants us, had organised it, and it just went, oh, God, it's sold out. And and people were coming from all over the world, like literally like flying in from around the world. So it's like, God, don't cancel now because people have bought tickets. So
I mean, it's the same with us. People are flying from Melbourne. I've seen I've seen Italy, Spain, all over America, Florida, Atlanta, like LA, New York. People are flying in for it. So that does stress me out a little bit.
Yes, no pressure.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. Well, it's amazing. And then, I love it. I just think it's kind of lovely because actually people get a bit like, actually, especially in the world today, you think you need some happy distractions, don't you?
Yeah, people are generally happy. It lifts everyone, and it's made people happy that really want to see it. I'm so grateful that people have taken Gene down that deeply, I mean, I think that says something about the music and the lyrics. It is sort of stuff that can be exist on quite a few levels, and when it is taken down very deep, it's with you forever,
Yes.
and that shows it stood the test of time, and still, there's still a very deep feeling for us,
Well, I think that's amazing because actually what I've noticed, because to be honest, there was a lot of indie bands I missed the first time because it wasn't always that easy to hear them. But then the ones that I've kind of gone back and listened to and discovered their work, I've always been amazed actually at the depth of their kind of musicality and their kind of commitment and the lyrical quality or kind of sentiment. And it's like, God, there was so much good music. But again, I think people had the time to just literally focus on doing that thing. They didn't particularly have to go and do lots of other jobs. You know, for 5 years they could bum around. We called it bumming around in those days, didn't we? So, sort of happy hour at the pub, but you could just, focus on it. And I think a lot of those bands who did the 2 to 3 albums during the 80s and perhaps the 90s, you could go back and think, God, this is an amazing body of work. It's really stunning.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I highly recommend it. For like people sort of like on the edge of doing it or not. Yeah, I love that Man from Del Monte's story about people coming from all over for about that's what fandom is. And we're all fans um, I was a huge fan of the Stranglers and the Damned, and stuff like that. I remember being in the mosh pit for all those bands, as a kid, like and the Clash. I saw the Clash. Like, I'm very lucky to have seen the Clash in the original lineup. And,
Yes, absolutely. And so, will you be having quality merch on this occasion?
Yeah, I mean, that's the next thing. I think once this gig is sort of kind of done and dusted, which hopefully it will be soon, in terms of, promote it necessarily, because it's sold out, we'll be looking at all that. And there will be some new merch and, excuse me, I mean, but we haven't actually got to it yet, it's just sort of it's one of it's the next thing is the warm-up shows. Actually, no, I've been told not to call them warm-up shows,
No.
even though they're in smaller venues, because people around the country don't want to. It's a very good point, this, that Kev made. That people up north, wherever, don't want to be seen as sort of, let's say you're only good for a warm-up type thing. But it's like, I totally get that. It's just like, it's just another show. So there'll be 2 more shows, but they will be smaller and and without the production of London.
Yes.
So I don't think we didn't quite go as far as committing to touring. I don't think that, well, for the reason that we've all got jobs. And Martin's a lecturer at the college in Brighton. He teaches music and songwriting down there, and Steve's got quite a corporate job, and as I said to you, I'm a wine merchant. I have to keep my clients supplied, and
Yes.
so we can't commit to touring yet. But I know for a fact that lots of offers are coming in for 2026.
It's quite funny that, because I was talking to, I've been talking to quite a few bands, and because they don't really want to give up too much of their day job. So it's like, yes, we'll tour on a Friday and a Saturday and recover on the Sunday and back to work on the Monday. But yes, it's like, you know what I mean? It's quite nice. I think that's quite a nice thing to do, really. I think, it sort of also gives everyone a chance to recover and digest it, but it's probably
Can I have the day off? Can I have the day off work? Well, what's it for? Well, I'm headlining Hammersmith. All right then.
Have the morning. Come in at midday anyway. Yes.
Yeah. You make sure you're in by midday.
Yes, you can make the hours up later. Oh, thank you very much. Yes. Well, look, this has been. Well, thank you ever so much, Matt, for your time. This has been amazing. And yes,
It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. And if you want, I can always send you the link, and you can put it on the Gene.
Oh no,
media.
I will, absolutely. Yeah, I'll definitely
People
spread
love
it.
a good story. But yes, well, best of luck for the summer and the I know, East Anglian wine country that we seem to have got quite a lot of vineyards now.
Yes, I mean they're everywhere, aren't they?
Well, actually, it's been the warmest and sunniest March I've ever known. So I don't know, is that good or bad for the English grape?
It's kind of yeah. I mean, the global warming. So people in the Champagne region are now looking at England. Buying up land here because the climate is getting more and more suited. To it's not good for the world, but it is quite good for England in terms of growing grapes. They make quite decent sparkling wine here. No, they are starting to in the past few years.
Yes.
Um, it's but yeah, so yeah, people are buying up the vineyards. So farming land is being sort of given over to vineyards, and as I say, it's a bad thing for the world, but good for some farmers in Sussex and East Anglia.
Yes, absolutely. Well, yes, it's amazing. Look, I'll let you go, but thank you ever so much for your time and all the best for the summer and obviously your musical adventure later. And also, I really loved your solo album, and
Thank you.
a lot of the songs on it were just fantastic. So, yes, it wasn't. Yeah, it was great. Snowy Peaks. I say,
Uh,
I'll check it out. It's brilliant. It's a
Thank you,
classic.
mate. That's lovely of you. Cheers.
Yeah. Well, take care and
All
all the
right,
best.
David.
See you
All right.
later. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Indeed. And on that bombshell, we'll leave it there. But a massive thank you to Matt for giving me the time for that interview. This has been the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites. Just do C86 Show. Also, all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.